What is going on, guys? In today's video I will show you the top 3 best builds in part of Exile's 2 new update, the Rise of the Abyssal. So in this guide I will give you a quick overview of each setup, then I will explain what skill gems and upgrades should you focus on, then as well we'll see what is the best gear and how to get it, and then finally we will go over the passive tree, stats, your skill rotations, and even what Atlas passive should you use, so we would be able to get the highest damage possible and much more. And remember, if you want to check these builds, look up the best items, the skill trees, and path of building, then check my links in the description. If you ever played Path of Exile 2 for long enough, then you know that the grind for currency can feel endless, and that's where today's sponsor comes in. KaidGames is a trusted platform used by over 150,000 gamers worldwide. They offer pro player support in more than top 25 games, including POE 2. No matter if you need a faster start, you want help with the tough content, or just want currency delivered safely and quickly, then KaidGames has you covered. What I really like is how smooth the whole process is, from click to the gameplay in minutes, clear and fast chats with their team, plus if an order is not fulfilled you get an instant refund. I've tried it myself and honestly it just makes the game more fun. So if you wanna skip the grind and enjoy POV2 your way, then click my link in the description to check out KaidGames and use my code KAID for extra 10% off. The setup takes the full advantage of the brand new infusion mechanics by letting us unload insane amount of burst AoE damage while still maintaining off-screen clear speed that feels borderline unfair. This build feels smooth early on, scales like crazy later, and has a god mode energy when it really comes fully online. This is not just your average lightning caster, this is the mana stacking arc stormweaver, which is a build that completely rewrites how you think about resources. Instead of mana just being a bar you deplete when casting skills, it becomes the core stat that fuels everything, so offense, defense, sustain. All of these will tie back to one thing, the maximum mana. The more mana you stack, the more devastating arc becomes, because the harder you shock enemies, the more effective your defenses become. By combining Stormweaver's lightning ascendancy tools with the Archmage scaling and intelligence gearing, this build transforms your blue orbs into the single most important stat in the game. Its chaining clears trash mobs like nothing else, and when combined with the Stormweaver bonuses and the mana scaling, its single target absolutely shreds bosses. Every chain, every crit, every shock is powered by investment that we poured into our mana pool, making the skill feel both satisfying and incredibly reliable. And backing up the arc, we have new infusions. These will let us stack up burst windows where our damage goes into overdrive, and thanks to our mana synergy, we can easily afford it. So let's take a look at our skill gems. At the heart of this build is the arc. It's our bread and butter, our primary source of clear, and the spell that scales directly with our mana stacking approach. The gem supports here are focused on turning arc into a powerhouse. So Archmage is mandatory, converting your massive mana pool into the raw damage. Then you want supports like the spell Echo for the rapid double casting, increased critical damage, and the chance for scaling shock multipliers. When you're hitting with the arc under a full set of infusions, it feels like chaining lightning storms across the entire screen. Next is the Orb of Storms, and this is more just a utility button. Orb of Storms will apply consistent shocks and the exposures by setting up enemies that take increased damage, but the real synergy here comes from combining it with infusions. So casting Orb of Storms essentially will prime your rotation, letting you build those infusion stacks that supercharge your arc spam. You just need to place it down before every big fight and watch it boost your damage. Then next we got Mana Tempest, which is a crucial sustain skill. This one keeps your resources topped off and ensures that even in extended fights, you never feel starved for the mana. It creates those burst windows where you can spam arc relentlessly without worrying. You'll learn to time it with your Orb of Storms and the Sigil of Power for the maximum effect. Speaking of which, the Sigil of Power is another gem that fits seamlessly into this build. It gives you an area of strength to fight inside, both by increasing your lightning damage and providing a layer of protection against heavy hits. You can drop it for the bosses or dangerous rares, and it turns those fights into controlled battlegrounds, where you're the one dictating the pace. Now let's talk about the passive tree. The essential psychology here is simple. Stack as much mana as possible, and then let every part of the build flow from that. Nodes that increase maximum mana, both flat and percentage based, are your top priority. Intelligence nodes are also highly valuable, as they boost mana while helping to meet the gem requirements. Once Foundation is in place, you can branch into spell damage, lightning penetration, and the shock effect nodes. These will ensure that the arc feels deadly in both mapping and bossing. Shock effect in particular is critical because the Stormweaver's Ascendancy passives will reward you heavily for applying and scaling shock. The more consistently and powerfully you can shock, the more everything else will snowball. Cast speed is another core investment, because you're spamming arc continuously. More cast speed not only makes the build smoother, but also increases the EPS by letting you fit more casts into each infusion windows. Then on defensive side, the tree grabs key nodes for the Mind over Matter and the Eldritch Battery by converting mana into effective mitigation. Life and energy shield clusters are also picked up with efficiency, but our true defense comes from regeneration and recovery scaling. Mana recovery nodes ensure that even after big hits or heavy casting, your resource pool will snap back instantly, letting you keep casting and surviving. Then for cluster jewels and extensions, you want to look for curse effectiveness, lightning area of effect, and mana recovery bonuses. These reinforce both the offense and sustain, keeping your build running at a peak power during extended fights. Now let's move into the gear. The number one rule is to stack mana everywhere where you can. Every piece of gear is an opportunity to push your pool higher, and every roll of flat or percentage increased mana will directly scale your damage and survivability. For your helmet, the best in slot is the Aviana Tiara, ideally rolled with high flat mana, intelligence, and resistances. Then for your offhand, the Sacred Focus is incredible, by amplifying the spell damage while also giving you room to scale mana-based defenses. Then for gloves, go with the Maligori's Virtuosity. The crit scaling here is huge, and it ties perfectly into the build shock mechanics. Then for boots, we should get the Bangle Sandals, again to prioritize mana, movement speed, and resistances. Then your body armor is the Altar Robe, which is chosen for its mana scaling potential and defensive flexibility. The belt is also absolutely non-negotiable, which is the Darkness Enthroned. Into this, you also want to socket the Tain Granel's Rune of Mastery, or increased shock magnitude. This interaction is one of the biggest power spikes in the build, and you will feel the difference immediately. Make sure that your version of the belt also allows glove sockets so you can maximize customization. Then for rings, we want one with a topaz ring and one with a ruby ring, each one rolled with a flat mana, resistances, and ideally intelligence. These will cover your defenses while scaling damage. And then finally for the amulet, we have the Lunar Amulet. Here you want +1 to all lightning or spell gems, alongside flat mana, intelligence, and the maximum life. Then anointing this with a shock related passives or the lightning damage is a cherry on top. Overall, yes, the gearing path is demanding, but every upgrade feels monumental. By the time that you're stacking multiple high mana rolls across your gear, the damage and sustain will be to insane levels. And now finally, let's see how to actually play this build. From Act 3 and onwards, once you pick up the Mana Tempest, you will feel the core loop come online. The rotation for the bosses is straightforward but immensely satisfying. So you drop the Sigil of Power to set up your arena, then apply elemental weaknesses for the cursed multipliers, then cast Orb of Storms twice to stack your infusions, then pop the Mana Tempest to flood your mana recovery, and then unleash the arc spam until infusions expire, then rinse and repeat and watch the bosses melt under consistent shock chains. Then for general mapping, it's even simpler. Just pop the Mana Tempest, cast arcs, and let the chains do all the work. Most monsters won't even reach you before the lightning erases them. In denser content like the Legion or Delirium, you'll find the more monsters they are, the faster they vanish. It's that kind of a scaling that feels more OP the bigger the fight gets. And then defensively, we are constantly covered by the mana pool acting as a shield. Convalescence will give us sustain, while Eldritch Battery and Mind over Matter mean that you always have casting power even if you take a bit of a hit. Keep the Orb of Storms rolling for the shock and infusions, and your survivability will feel much better than a traditional sorceress build. This build has quickly become one of my most favorite ones, because it manages to combine the speed and the rhythm of a melee combat with the safety and explosiveness of the cold damage scaling. The backbone of this build is the Invoker's Ascendancy, which is absolutely the best fit for any type of player, but especially hardcore. The Meditate skill will allow us to stack an oversized energy shield pull by giving us a massive defensive buffer. Then lead me through the Grace Ascendancy will ramp up our spirit, which we channel directly into the Ghost Dance, Elemental Conflicts, Wind Dancer, and the Herald of the Ice. These will work in the background for crazy buffs. Then on the damage side, the Ascendancy nodes like I Am the Thunder and I Shall Rage are what pushes the setup from strong to downright godlike. They give us valuable scaling options and ramp up our damage multipliers in ways that feel instantly impactful the moment that you invest into them. With a solid staff in hand, most of your map clearing is completely easy. Then Shattering Palm, Herald with the Ice and the Frozen Spite will tear through the packs with near effortless speed. When you do encounter tankier rares or the bosses, then we shift into the gears, so you will lean into the Quarterstaff in the combination with the Aelith Shines to generate power charges and then transition into the Charge Staff and the Tempest Belt, and then let the Ice Strike handle the heavy lifting for the single target burst damage. Sustain is another highlight of this build. Right now you can run both, so Clarity 1 and Clarity 2 simultaneously, and the bonuses will stack. This provides enormous increase to mana regeneration. If you combine this with at least one mana leech affix on your rings and some additional flat mana rolls, then you will never find yourself starved for resources in the middle of combat, so you can basically do crazy amount of damage 24/7. So let's take a look at the skill gems. The Ice Strike itself is the centerpiece. Every swing will convert your melee attack into icy projectiles that fan outward, chilling and freezing enemies on the contact. This gives you the best of both worlds, so deadly single target pressure for bosses and wide screen control for clearing maps. To keep the tempo consistent, the Quarterstaff Strike will play a vital role. It fuels your charge generation and allows you to maintain a smooth rhythm of attacks. When paired with the Aelith Chimes, the Quarterstaff Strikes ensures that you're always primed to unleash the Charge Staff, or combine it with the Tempest Belt if the moment calls for it. The Shattering Palm then joins the setup as an additional cold damage source. It keeps the pressure on the enemies between Ice Strike volleys, and synergizes beautifully with the freeze mechanics by stacking damage while locking down the targets. Then Herald of Ice is where this build really shines in the term of clearing speed. Every time you shatter a frozen enemy, the Herald of Ice will trigger a cascade of icy explosions that spread across the entire packs. This means that Ice Strike does not just kill the first enemy it touches, it actually sets off a chain of reactions that wipe the screen in seconds. Then Meditate keeps your mana stable and smooths out the cooldowns, so you never feel locked out of your rotation. Then Elemental Conflux will spike your elemental damage across the board by amplifying your cold output to levels that can shred even endgame bosses. And then Ghost Dance provides a layer of survivability that doubles as mobility by giving you the freedom to reposition quickly, dodge telegraph attacks, and keep yourself alive when fights get messy. I also want to point out that the Aelith Chime is not negotiable here. Without it, the build loses its seamless charge generation, and the combat rhythm will feel clunky. And on top of it, just as critical, you must also run both, so Clarity 1 and Clarity 2 together. These bonuses will stack by allowing you to stay in the thick of a combat 24/7. Then next up we have the passive tree, and for the Ice Strike Invoker it's deliberately structured to maximize cold scaling while stacking enough defensive mechanics to make even hardcore progression viable. The first and most obvious focus is on the cold specialization. You want to prioritize nodes that increase cold damage, penetration and the freeze chance. This gives your Ice Strike the power to both shred through the enemies and control them at the same time. Freezing enemies is one of the strongest defensive mechanics available, and this build really weaponizes it fully. Then our second focus is on the aerial scaling. Ice Strike projectiles and the Herald of Ice explosions both will benefit massively from increased AoV, so by investing into these nodes, you don't just deal more damage, you actually cover more ground with every attack, which makes your clear faster and more consistent. This is a crucial part of what makes this build feel so smooth to play. Then mana efficiency is another important choice, because we spam the Ice Strike constantly, so we want to go through the nodes that give us mana recovery and sustain nodes, and this is boosted by the charge generation and crit scaling, which both synergizes beautifully with Invoker's ascendancy. Overall, with these investments, the build bursts feel reliable, not streaky, and your resource engine never falters. And then defensively, the passive tree leans heavily into the Ghost Dance synergy, so you build layers of evasion, dodge and energy shield recovery that allow us to avoid, mitigate and recover from incoming damage. Frozen enemies combined with the evasion-based passives will create a defensive loop, where you're both harder to hit and actively reducing the number of enemies. Altogether, this passive tree will achieve the perfect balance, so offensively it implies cold scaling, critical multipliers on AoV, and then defensively we combine evasion, freeze and the shield sustain. The result is a build that feels deadly without ever being squishy, and is perfectly suited for any type of player, but especially hardcore. Next, let's take a look at the gear, and here you just need to follow a very simple rule: stack survivability while also stacking staff-based damage. The first priority is capping your resistances at 75% across the board. Without that, you simply won't survive in the red maps. Once resistances are handled, then you want to focus on the energy shield, life, dexterity, physical damage scaling, evasion, and even attack speed. These are the stats that make your build OP, so your main hand weapon should be the Razor Quarterstaff. This is where the bulk of your damage comes from, so invest heavily in increased physical damage rolls, flat cold damage and critical multipliers. From there, your helmet Ancestral Tiara is the best option, thanks to its energy shield and evasion combination. Then the Falconer's Jacket is the armor of our choice, by offering a balanced package from survivability to the offense. Then the Sakema's Sandals will provide the movement speed and resistances that you want on the boots, while the Breach and the Topaz Ring will handle the mana leech, flat mana scaling and defensive bonuses. Then the Lunar Amulet will offer cold scaling and the crit synergy, making it a natural fit for this setup. Then the Grim Gloves will stack attack speed and resistances, while Ingenuity Belt will ensure sustain and defensive stacks. Overall, every piece of this gear plays a role, and while the staff does the heavy lifting, it's the synergy across the rest of the kit that makes the build feel truly unshakable. And finally, don't forget about the anointment, and we wanna go with the Bestial Skin. It's cost effective, efficient, and works beautifully with the scaling priorities of our build. And now finally, let's see how to actually play this build. Your main loop is simple but endlessly satisfying, so Ice Strike is your core ability. You will be spamming it 24/7, pairing packs, freezing enemies, and laying down steady pressure against bosses. Every strike sends icy projectiles across the battlefield by stacking damage and control at the same time. Then to keep your engine running, you want to weave in the Quarterstaff Strike. This generates charges that fuel charge staff, ensuring that you always have the burst potential when you want it. Once momentum is rolling, then you drop Shattering Palm into the mix. This is your bursty AoV option, especially potent in boss fights or against highly packed mobs. Then Herald of Ice will run passively, as it transforms your combat into an avalanche of explosions. At this time, you want to focus on chaining freezes into the shatters, and you will watch entire screens vanish in icy detonation. Then, when your mana starts dipping, then Meditate keeps you topped off, with the Elemental Conflicts will spike your damage output during the key phases. And then finally, the Ghost Dance is the last tool in your kit, by letting you reposition, getting the dodge mechanics and staying alive during the most dangerous fights. This build has been taking off in 0.3, because it completely flips the script on what you expect from a spellcaster. Instead of relying on elemental nukes or flashy crit chains, the Blood Mage thrives on turning its own life force into a weapon and using bleeding debuffs to grind enemies down. Every single cast has a weight and every channel will feel dangerous, and the payoff is absolutely insane. At the heart of this build is the unique staff, the Sanguine Oath, which is a weapon that turns the act of a casting into a bloodletting ritual. Whenever you spend life instead of mana, your spells not only deal increased bleed damage, but they leave behind a lingering hemorrhage effect that stacks higher than anything that you can achieve with a conventional bleed setup. Without this staff, the build feels incomplete, but once you get it, the entire playstyle transforms. Your health pool will become your resource and your weapon. Pair this with a keystone called Hemorrhage Flow, which amplifies the bleed duration and scaling based on the missing life. And suddenly, being half dead actually will boost your performance. What makes the Blood Mage so unique is how he walks the razor's edge between the self-destruction and overwhelming offense. You're constantly trading your own life away, but in return, your screen floods with pulsing crimson damage over time effects that chew through even the tankiest bosses. And this isn't a glass cannon build either, it's a bleeding engine that thrives in chaos. So let's take a look at the core of our build, which is the skill gems. At the center is the Blood Surge, which is our main bleeding skill. The Blood Surge is a channeling spell that consumes your life in a steady pulse, while stacking devastating bleed effects on every enemy caught in its wave. It's your bread and butter, and you want to roll it on packs, on bosses, and anything that dares to step near you. The Blood Surge will scale with both the spell power and the physical bleed multipliers, which makes it a dream build around. Next we got the Crimson Chains, which is a tether spell that lashes enemies together with the veins of the blood. Anytime you inflict bleed on the enemy, the chains will replace it across the entire group. This is where mapping gets wild. You lock down a pack, bleed one target, and instantly the whole group is hemorrhaging, as if they got caught in the same cut. The Crimson Chains also will give us insane clear speed, because the more monsters you group up, the more bleed it spreads. And then for sustain and survivability, we're leaning heavily onto the Blood Offering. This ritualistic spell sacrifices a chunk of your life, but in return it grants you a massive damage boost, the bleed duration and the spell damage for a short window. And the best thing is that if Blood Offering kills any bleeding enemies, then you instantly recover a portion of the life you spent. It basically turns this mechanic into a self-fueling engine that keeps your cycle of casting alive. And then defensively, the core tools are the Bone Ward and the Camouflage Armor. Bone Ward is a barrier spell that absorbs a percentage of incoming physical hits by hardening your blood into the Skeletal Armor. And then Camouflage Armor is more thematic. It thickens your skin with a coolated blood by scaling directly with the amount of bleed damage you inflicted recently. The more enemies bleed, the harder you are to kill. And on top of that, utility gems like the Sanguine Dash will give us mobility, while synergizing perfectly with the bleed triggers. Every time you dash, you leave behind a trail of spattered blood that bleeds enemies who touch it. And then for bosses, you keep an Sanguinate Totem in your pocket. When you drop this totem, it echoes your bleed spells automatically by stacking additional hemorrhage effects while you focus on dodging mechanics. All of this comes together in a gem setup that feels more like a blood ritual than a normal rotation, so you're constantly juggling life, bleeding the room, and constantly being on the edge between insane power and dying. Next up we have our skill tree. The first cornerstone is the Hemorrhage Flow, which is a keystone that defines our damage scaling. It converts the missing life into the bleed duration and damage. What this means is that the lower you sit on your life pool, the more powerful your spells become. It rewards this risky playstyle between being low HP and unleashing insane amount of damage numbers. From there we invest into the 3 key paths. The first is life scaling. You want as much as maximum life as possible, not only for survivability, but because your life pool doubles as your mana pool and damage amplifier. Every cluster that gives you increased life regen and the life recovery from the spells is mandatory. Then the second path is the bleed and physical scaling. Nodes that increase physical damage over time, bleed duration, and bleeding effectiveness are your bread and butter. Unlike crit or elemental builds that chase multipliers, this path is all about stacking consistency and inevitability. Every cast you make will leave an enemy rotting, and those bleeds will keep ramping. Then the third path is defensive sustain and recovery. You'll want clusters that boost life leech, life on a kill and recovery rate. This ensures that the self-harm aspect of the casting will not spiral out of control. The Blood Mage thrives when it constantly trades life away and instantly regenerates it through the damage. By the time that your tree is complete, you will feel unkillable as long as you are casting, and enemies become your lifeline. Next up we have gear. Your absolute best in slot is the Sanguine Oath, which is a staff that enables the build. Nothing compares to it. It turns your self damage into scaling bleed multipliers and adds the signature hemorrhage effect. A corrupted version with a +1 to all spell gems is the dream scenario. Then for your helmet, the Veil of the Red Hunger is the go-to. It increases the bleed duration while also granting you life regen per bleeding enemy nearby. In dense maps, this essentially makes you immortal. Then chest armor should be a high armor base with resistances. If you can roll increased life as extra energy shield, then it's even better, as it adds another buffer for your self-damage cycle. Then for gloves you want percentage increased physical damage over time, and plus levels of sacred bleed gems. Then for boots you should prioritize movement speed, life, and the bleed immunity corruption if possible. Then your amulet base should be the Bloodstone Amulet, which inherently boosts the bleed scaling. Look for life, damage over time multipliers, and ideally a corruption that adds bleed deals damage faster. Then rings fill in resistances and life, but the dream mod is the bleeding you inflict deals damage faster. This single thing can drastically improve our boss DPS. Belts should be heavy leather with a flat life, bleed scaling, and the flask effectiveness. And don't forget about annoyance. On a budget, grab the Hemorrhage for consistent bleed scaling, but if you got more currency, then Sanguinary Pact will give you insane offense and sustain. And for pure damage, Exsanguination is the capstone anointment. And now finally, let's see how to actually play this build. Your rotation begins with the Crimson Chains. Lash enemies together so that every bleed will spread. Then channel the Blood Surge to stack hemorrhage on everything in a sight. Grab the Exsanguinate Totem on the bosses or tough rares, so it echoes your casts and doubles your bleed application. Then keep the Blood Offering rolling on a cooldown because it's your sustain and the damage steroid. Then defensively, combine the Bone Ward and the Camouflage Armor. These will give you the breathing room to stay in range and keep channeling. Use Sanguine Dash both for mobility and to leave behind the blood trails that push enemies chasing you. And then when mapping, the playstyle feels super chaotic and and simple. You dash into the packs, chain them together, bleed 1, and watch the whole group melt in seconds. Every explosion from the Scarlet Ritual will feel satisfying, and the sustained loop of killing bleeding enemies will mean that your life pool refills faster as you spend it. Against bosses, it's all about patience. You can't one-shot them instantly, but you suffocate them under the endless bleeds. The longer the fight goes on, the stronger you become, because Eternal Sanguine will guarantee sustain, and the hemorrhage flow will turn your missing life into the bonus damage.